Okay. One of the videos that I did about the spike protein going into the nucleus and possibly interfering with DNA double-strand break repairs made me think about this, which is what's called the reproducibility crisis or the replication crisis in science. Um, the reason I thought about that is because that's a single paper out of one lab that talked about the spike protein going into a nucleus, and it got a lot of press. People were very excited about it, and there was a lot of activity on social media and press about it. And the thing is that most single studies can generally not be relied upon. And that's because most studies are not reproduced. And until things are reproduced, it's hard to know whether it's a reliable finding or not. Because there's so many things that can lead to that. One is the obvious things like someone could just be flat out lying. That's very, very rare. Or someone could be kind of massaging the data. That's also pretty rare. But things like not kind of cherry picking data, that's less rare. And there's also things like it could be that in one lab their machine was like not calibrated correctly, or their reagents were a little different, or their cell lines were a little different, and it only works in that one lab, and it may not reflect what is actually happening. Okay, so this is a very important paper that was published back in 2016 in Nature, and it was a survey of over 1,500 scientists. And what they found is they found that more than 70% of researchers had tried and failed to reproduce someone else's experiments. So, they read about some paper and some experiment, and, there's a methods part of the paper that talks about how they did it, where they got their reagents, and how they did the experiment. And so, it's designed so that another scientist can read it and do the same experiment and reproduce the experiment. But more than 70% of researchers attempted to do that, and when they did it, they did not get the same results as the person that published the paper. And then this is what's more interesting. More than half of them had tried to reproduce their own experiments and they weren't able to do it, which is kind of crazy. So that tells you that there's a lot of stuff in there that's probably not reliable data. That's how I interpret it. Now, what they did is although 52% of those surveyed, there's a significant crisis of reproducibility. Less than 31% think that failure to reproduce published results means that the result is probably wrong. And most say that they still trust the literature. Now, there are reasons to believe that the uh, that the failure to reproduce data doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just may mean that works in only a very specific circumstance. So it's right, but it may not be generally applicable to kind of to other things. It may just apply to a very specific set of circumstances at which that experiment happened. So the experiment wasn't wrong. It's just that if you can't reproduce it reliably, then you can't generalize it to things outside that one experiment. And then when they've when the people have done literature reviews to find out what is reproducible, the reproducibility rates are pretty bleak. So 40 to 10%. So 10 to 40% of experiments are reproducible. And so why is this happening? And the reason is that there's a couple of reasons. One is there's a lot of pressure on scientists in academic centers, and most scientists are in academic centers or in foundations where they're evaluated on the number of papers they write. And so the more papers you write, the more you get published, the more that you're thought to be a productive scientist and to be doing good work. So if you don't publish a paper at least once or twice a year, you're thought to be not doing work. And so there's this tremendous pressure to produce research that's publishable. So there's this huge growth of scientific publications, but I would say the quality of the scientific publications is far lower than it was in the distant past. Long time ago, scientists may work their whole life and just publish one or two papers, and these were things that they had worked on for, maybe sometimes decades. And the stuff that they were writing about was important and consequential. And this time, I would say, probably less than 1% of the papers that are published actually change what people do or move forward significantly scientific thought. Now, what that means is something that's really important that like changes patient care or changes the thought process in science is definitely going to be replicated 100% because if it's not important, no one really cares about it, and they're not going to take the time to just try to reproduce it, and they're not going to try to build on top of it. But if something is important, some people are going to try to build on top of that work or to reproduce it. And if the thing doesn't work, when you try to build on top of it, then you're on a shaky foundation. It won't work. And everyone will quickly realize that what was being suggested is not the case. So I think science is very self correcting in that the important things will be reproduced. The important things will be reproduced or built on top of, and they will be shown to work. But a lot of the stuff that's published is not really consequential, is not really changing patient care, and is not really moving forward the knowledge base of a field significantly. So people kind of ignore it. It becomes a very fringe thing. Maybe a few people kind of cite it, but it's not really reproduced, and they don't build on top of it. So it's not as huge a problem as it might seem. Another interesting thing I found is this paper, which was published in May of this year, and it's kind of like the same thing about fake news and social media, because that stuff is so novel and interesting. That gets kind of like like retweeted or spread around more. And the same thing happens in scientific literature. Non-replicable publications are cited more often than replicable ones, mainly because they are more interesting. When the results are more interesting, they apply lower standards regarding their reproducibility. So, things that are interesting, like that spike protein paper, is probably going to get cited a lot just because it's interesting. But it may not reflect how reliable that information is. So anyways, I will link these three papers below. It's an interesting thing to know that most scientific papers are not reproducible, and they cannot be reproduced even by the same scientist again. But the thing to understand is that important things that are consequential, are definitely gonna be reproduced, or they're gonna build upon that. And other labs, when multiple people are trying to build upon someone's work, if that work does not stand up, it will quickly become apparent that work is not standing up to scrutiny. So I think the important things are reproduced, and so we still can have reliability on this situation. All right, so any comments, questions, please put them below. Thanks for watching.